There are nights when the house is quiet and your thoughts finally speak louder than the world ever did. You sit with memories you did not invite, wondering how something that felt so sincere could still end in distance. I have sat in that quiet too, not as someone above you, but as someone who has learned how heavy silence can feel. Sometimes the hardest part is not the loss itself, but the feeling that your heart was misunderstood. You loved with honesty, not perfection, and you are still asking yourself whether that honesty mattered. Scripture reminds us that God looks at the heart, while the world keeps scanning the surface, and that difference changes everything. There are moments when people only understand us after we are no longer explaining ourselves. Not because we failed to speak clearly, but because they were not ready to listen. Even Jesus stood before people who heard his words and still did not grasp his heart until later. Should soften your self-blame. When love breaks down, it does not always do so loudly. Sometimes it happens quietly, through small misunderstandings that pile up like dust on a window. Only later, when the light hits just right, does someone realize how much was there all along. You may sense that someone has finally seen you clearly, not through emotion, but through reflection. That awareness often comes with tears, not because love vanished, but because it was recognized too late to be simple. The Bible speaks of sorrow that leads to wisdom, and that kind of sorrow is not wasted. If your heart feels tender right now, that is not weakness. Tenderness is evidence that you did not shut yourself down to survive. The Psalms often speak of a heart that can still feel deeply, even after disappointment, as a heart God stays close to. You do not need to rush your healing to make anyone else comfortable. Faith teaches patience, not as delay, but as trust that growth is happening beneath the surface. Seeds grow in darkness before they ever break through the soil, and no one calls that waiting a failure. It is natural to wonder whether your story would have changed if understanding had come sooner. But wisdom from Scripture tells us not to live in imagined pasts, because grace only works in the present. God does not ask you to rewind your life, only to walk forward with what you have learned. There is dignity in the way you loved, even if it was not fully received. Love given sincerely is never wasted, because it shapes the giver as much as the receiver. Paul wrote that love bears and hopes, not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because love itself is a discipline of the soul. If someone has come to understand your heart now, that understanding belongs to them, not as a burden for you to carry. You are not responsible for managing another person's regret or realization. People to sit with their understanding without chasing them down for closure. And there is wisdom in that restraint. Your worth has never been measured by whether someone stayed or left. It was established long before you were ever chosen or rejected by another human being. Genesis reminds us that value came from being created, not from being approved. Some of you are learning how to be gentle with yourselves for the first time. That gentleness is not indulgence. It is stewardship of the life God entrusted to you. Even Christ withdrew to quiet places, not because he was weak, but because strength needs rest. You may feel tempted to interpret tears or realizations as signs you should return to what hurt you. Discernment asks a different question, not, do they feel it now, but is this space healthy for my soul? Scripture urges us to guard the heart, not lock it away, but protect it wisely. Healing does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop bleeding. There is a difference, and the Bible consistently points us toward wholeness, not numbness. Some relationships teach us how deeply we can love. Others teach us how deeply we must trust God when love alone is not enough. Both lessons are sacred, even when they arrive wrapped in disappointment. If you are waiting for clarity, let it come without forcing it. God's timing is often slower than our anxiety, but steadier than our fear. Reminds us that understanding has its own season, and trying to steal it early only exhausts us. You are allowed to feel grief and gratitude at the same time. Grief for what did not grow, and gratitude for what did. The Psalms hold both lament and praise in the same breath, and so can you. Some of you need to hear this plainly. You did not imagine the depth of what you shared. Being misunderstood does not mean you were unclear. Sometimes it means the listener was unprepared. If reflection has softened someone else's heart, that is their work to carry forward. Your work is to continue becoming the person who loves with wisdom as well as sincerity. Proverbs teaches that understanding grows quietly, like a path that gets clearer as you keep walking. Faith does not promise that every relationship will resolve cleanly. It promises that God will remain present, steady, and attentive to your becoming. It is consistent, and consistency heals more than intensity ever could. There may come a day when this chapter feels less sharp, not erased, not minimized, but integrated into who you are. Romans speaks of renewal through transformed thinking, and that transformation takes time, not pressure. If you find moments of peace returning, receive them without suspicion. Peace is not denial. It is alignment. Jesus spoke of a peace that does not depend on circumstances, and that peace often arrives quietly. You are not behind. You are not late. You are exactly where growth is possible, and that is enough for today. As you move forward, let gratitude lead rather than fear. Gratitude for what you learned, for what you survived, for what you are still open enough to feel. Scripture repeatedly pairs gratitude with strength, not because life is easy, but because perspective matters. If this reflection met you where you are, you may choose to stay connected through Angel's Decode channel, not as a requirement, but as a place for thoughtful conversation and shared encouragement. You can leave a word of hope in the comments if you feel led. Sometimes your quiet sentence becomes someone else's answered prayer. As we close this moment, take a breath without rushing the next one. Trust that God is working beyond what you can see. Without demanding you understand everything now. Hope does not shout. It rests, and it waits with confidence grounded in faith. Stay with that breath for a moment longer, not to escape your thoughts, but to let them settle into something gentler. Faith often grows in these unremarkable pauses, when nothing is being fixed and nothing is being proven. There is a quiet courage in choosing not to reopen doors just because someone finally understands why they were closed. Understanding is meaningful, but safety and peace matter too. Even in Scripture, reconciliation was never rushed. It was always guided by wisdom and fruit, not emotion alone. You may notice that your heart feels different now than it did when everything first unraveled. Not harder, not colder, just clearer. Clarity is a gift that often comes after tears have already done their work. Some people realize the value of a thing only after they no longer hold it. That realization can be sincere and still not require your return. Jesus often acknowledged sincerity without re-entering situations that would pull him away from his calling. Your calling right now may simply be to keep becoming whole. Wholeness does not arrive all at once. It unfolds as you honor your limits. The Bible speaks of wisdom as something we grow into, not something we master overnight. If you feel conflicted, know that faith allows complexity. You can wish someone well and still choose distance. You can forgive without restoring access. Even God sets boundaries, and those boundaries are part of love, not a contradiction of it. There are lessons that only surface when emotions cool and reflection begins. Those lessons often feel sobering rather than dramatic. Sobriety of heart is not sadness. It is maturity. You might be learning that love does not require self-erasure. That realization alone is a turning point. Scripture reminds us to love our neighbor as ourselves. not instead of ourselves. If someone's tears came from finally seeing your patience, your loyalty, your restraint, let that be enough. You do not need to extract meaning from it beyond what it already is. Not every realization needs to become a reunion to be redemptive. God is attentive to the way you carry yourself now, to the gentler self-talk, to the way you no longer chase explanations that cost you your peace. You may still have days when old questions surface unexpectedly. That does not mean healing failed. It means memory is loosening its grip gradually, the way it always does. The Psalms never rushed grief out the door. They let it speak, then let trust respond. That rhythm is still available to you. If you are waiting for reassurance, let it come from steadiness rather than signs. Consistency is one of God's quiet languages. The sun rises without announcement, and no one doubts its faithfulness. There is something sacred about realizing you can survive unanswered questions. That strength does not announce itself. It simply shows up in how you live. Your future is not being held hostage by your past. It is being informed by it. Scripture teaches that wisdom remembers without reliving. If love returns to your life one day, it will not need to be proven through confusion or ache. It will feel more grounded, more mutual, more honest. Not because you are guarded, but because you are aware. Until then, your life is still full of growth that no one applauds, full of faith that does not need spectacle. You may come to see that what felt like loss was also refinement. Not punishment, not failure, but shaping. Even Jesus learned obedience through what he suffered, not because suffering was good, but because growth came through endurance. Let your prayers be simple if words feel heavy. God does not require eloquence, only sincerity. Sometimes silence itself becomes prayer. If you feel gratitude rising slowly, welcome it without guilt. You are not betraying what hurt you by feeling better. You are honoring the life still unfolding. There will be people who meet you later and never know how much it took to arrive as you are. It is healing. The Bible speaks of new names and new seasons, not because the old ones were lies, but because growth changes us. You are allowed to look ahead without constantly checking behind you. Faith is forward-facing by nature. Lot's wife looked back and became stuck, not because memory is wrong, but because dwelling there can freeze us. As this reflection settles, let gratitude replace the need for resolution. Not everything needs a final conversation to be complete. Some chapters close because you outgrew them. If you remain here with this channel, let it be for companionship, not dependence. Angel's Decode channel exists to offer perspective, not answers wrapped in certainty. Carry yourself gently today, not because you are fragile, but because you are valuable. God's care for you has never been conditional on being understood by another human being. Trust that what is meant to meet you will do so without requiring you to abandon your peace. Hope does not demand proof. It rests in God's steady character. And that steadiness has been holding you all along. As you carry this forward, remember that growth often feels ordinary while it is happening. There is no announcement when a heart becomes steadier. You notice it later, when old triggers no longer pull you under. Faith matures quietly. It shows up in how you respond instead of react, in how you pause before speaking, not because you are afraid, but because you are discerning. You may find yourself less interested in being fully understood by everyone. That is not withdrawal. It is wisdom. Even Jesus spoke in ways that only some were ready to receive. And he did not force clarity where readiness was missing. There is peace in realizing that not every connection was meant to last, but every connection had something to teach. Teaching does not always feel gentle. Still, Scripture reminds us that instruction, even when uncomfortable, shapes character. If you feel more grounded now, let that grounding become your prayer. You do not always need words to be faithful. Sometimes simply staying present is an act of trust. You are learning to listen to your inner life with more honesty. Not everything needs to be spiritualized to be sacred. Daily faith often looks like paying attention to what drains you and what restores you. There may be moments when nostalgia tries to soften what was painful. Memory does that. Wisdom helps you remember the whole story, not just the parts that ache for comfort. Allowed to want love without longing for what hurt you. Those two desires can coexist without contradiction. The Bible never asks us to confuse endurance with staying where we are diminished. As you move through your days, notice how your expectations have changed. You may be asking for less intensity and more integrity. That shift is not lowering standards, it is clarifying them. God's work in you is not measured by how quickly you move on. It is measured by how truthfully you live. Truth has a way of settling into the body slowly, like water finding its level. If forgiveness feels uneven, that is normal. Forgiveness is not a single decision. It is often a posture revisited. Even Peter asked how many times forgiveness was required, and the answer pointed toward patience, not perfection. Let patience begin with yourself. You are still learning how to live with an open heart and clear boundaries. That balance takes time to practice. You may notice that your prayers are changing. Less asking, more listening. Less urgency, more trust. Trust does not mean you stop caring about outcomes. It means you stop letting outcomes define your worth. Scripture consistently separates obedience from results, reminding us that faithfulness stands on its own. There is a steadiness growing in you that does not need validation. You feel it in how you walk away from what once pulled you back in. That steadiness is not pride. It is a humble, resilient strength. It is alignment. If loneliness visits from time to time, do not panic. Loneliness is not proof that something is wrong. Even prophets experienced isolation, not as abandonment, but as preparation. Preparation rarely looks impressive while it is happening. It looks like quiet evenings, honest reflection, and saying no when it would be easier to say yes. Those choices form character more than recognition ever could. You may find comfort in knowing that God is not disappointed in your pace. He is not tapping his foot, waiting for you to catch up. Scripture speaks of a shepherd who walks with the flock, not ahead of it. Let that image soften your striving. You are being guided, not evaluated. Evaluation demands performance. As understanding settles into your bones, you may realize you are less interested in explanations from others. Not because you are closed, but because you are complete enough without them. Completion does not mean you lack desire. It means desire no longer controls you. There is freedom in that. Not dramatic freedom, but sustainable freedom. The kind that holds up under ordinary life. If you choose to remain part of this space, let it be one voice among many that encourage reflection. Angel's Decode channel is not meant to replace your own discernment, only to walk alongside it at times. Before you return to your day, consider one quiet thing you are grateful for. Not something impressive, just something real. Gratitude grounds faith in lived experience. May you continue to grow without rushing. May your heart remain open without being unguarded. And may trust, steady and unforced, keep shaping your steps in ways that bring peace rather than noise.